Welcome to In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am passionate about helping women live authentically by listening to their inner voice. Get ready to be inspired by women of all walks of life that have set aside their should-bes and not good enoughs and are standing in their true voice, the voice of wisdom that each and every one of us has inside. Hello, you guys. This is Kelly, and you know it, but you're listening to In Her Voice, just in case you forgot in the last 30 seconds. I'm so glad that you decided to be here today because I have the amazing Lara Dalch on to talk with me and you and all of us about reactivating the real you. How awesome does that sound? Like getting back to who you really are. I love that. Like that to me, I want to do that every day. That needs to be a daily practice for all of us. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to dive in. But before we do that, I want to remind you that In Her Voice is sponsored by Beautycounter. And you might wonder, what the heck does skincare and makeup have to do with connecting to your inner voice? And you know what? That's a really good question. And so I want to let you know that a big reason why I am selling Beautycounter on my podcast is to support my podcast. It is my passion to get the message that you are worthy and that you have everything you need inside of you right now to do all of the things that you were meant to do. That is my message, and I get that out through my podcast. In order to continue with my podcast and to keep things moving forward so I can bring this message to you and these amazing guests to you, I have to be able to fund my podcast. I have to be able to run it, and it costs money to run it. And so I'm choosing to do that by selling Beautycounter. And the reason that I chose Beautycounter is because it is a mission-driven company. And I believe that I'm a mission-driven woman, and I am passionate when I see other women doing the same. So Beautycounter was created by a mission-driven woman who really believes in the power of safer skincare and bringing that to everyone, not just to people who buy Beautycounter, but to everybody through changing laws and creating awareness around what we're putting on our bodies. We honor our bodies day in and day out with what we put in it. So let's bring some awareness to what we put on it. And remember, every time that you buy a Beautycounter product through my link, kellycover.com/beauty, you are supporting me and you're supporting In Her Voice, and you're creating a way for this message of worthiness and of honoring your inner voice to get out into the world. And for that, I thank you. So let me tell you a little bit about Lara. Lara Dalch is a personal development and lifestyle coach to women on the rise who want more out of work, life, and body. She helps women bring the focus back to mind and body to form new habits that allow them to reclaim their health, happiness, and power so they can make lasting changes and achieve their big dreams in business and in life. Lara is a contributor to health and wellness website Mind Body Green and has been featured by Refinery 29, Town and Country, Elephant Journal, the University of Virginia, and the University of California, Berkeley. She holds a BA in psychology from the University of Virginia. She's a certified Pilates instructor and received her training to practice health coaching via the State University of New York and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. You can listen and subscribe to Laura's Women on the Rise podcast, of course, over on anywhere that you love to listen to podcasts. And we will put links to all of those good things in the show notes and right on your podcast app that you are listening to In Her Voice on right now. So without further ado, let's get right to the interview with Lara on reactivating the real you. Lara Dalch, I am so excited to have you on In Her Voice today. Thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure. I'm really excited to have this conversation too.
Oh, me too. And so we were talking before we got on about our theme. I like to have a theme for each day, and I chose the theme based on what you sent me as reactivating the real you. And you commented on like, oh, that's such an interesting take on that. So I think that's a great place to start. What does reactivating the real you mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's interesting, so the work that I do with women, and I call them women on the rise. They're all very high achieving women in some part of their life, or in all parts of their life, really. Often what's happening for them is they, in a nutshell, feel like they've lost touch with this sort of vibrant, powerful version of themselves, which I would call, now that you say it, now that you mention it, I would call that the real them, right? The real you. And helping them find her again is a big piece of my work. And it's all in service to helping them achieve whatever goals they have in their lives, because my feeling is if you don't have your, and I'll use the term self-care broadly, right? If you don't have your self-care, your mind, body health dialed in, you cannot achieve your goals in your life. You just can't. It's just not, I don't believe that it's possible. So that's what I mean by reactivating the real you, is helping, my clients get back in touch with that powerful place. And I, come at it from the perspective of mind, body health.
So I imagine, as most amazing coaches are or have experience in their life, that the work that you do stemmed from an experience you had in your own life. Yeah. And I'm curious about that. Like, did you find yourself in a place where you had, felt like the real you had died a little bit?
Yeah. It's funny looking back on it. I mean, the story I always tell about that is really that, I didn't have any kind of dramatic wake up call, like as far as like a health issue, for example. What happened for me happened out of pure curiosity. I was living in New York City. I lived in New York City for most of my 30s, and I was working in the advertising industry and in television mostly for Comedy Central and Cartoon Network during that time. So I was in a very high stress job, and I also at the same time became very curious about things like farm to table and organic foods and more natural ways of approaching medicine. And, partially because I had been exposed to some of those things when I had lived on the West Coast previous to going to New York. Anyway, long story short, it just so happened that the first Whole Foods market in Manhattan opened up down the street from me. And so,
fantastic.
Yeah, this curiosity kind of came together with that. And I was like, I wonder what would happen if I started eating differently, and taking care of my body differently. And so it just became this giant experiment out of curiosity. And at the same time, yes, looking back on it, my energy level was, I was literally like having moments in the afternoon where I was falling asleep at my desk, or, was attempting to fall asleep at my desk or not to. And as I started experimenting with these things, I started to feel better and more energetic and more like connected to my work, to my life, to my city. I was living in New York, and I was like some nights, going home and not doing anything because I was eating, I was living on, burritos from this place called Burritoville. And, on Thai takeout food and all this stuff, which I didn't sort of process that had anything to do with how I was showing up in my life. So it really came out of curiosity and experimentation. And as I started changing, the food on my plate and the way that I was moving my body and just sort of thinking about taking care of myself, everything changed. And I, fast forward several years later, took the leap into entrepreneurship, which I really don't think I could have done had I not first had this experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. There's so much there that I want to dive into. And the first piece of it is the symptoms that we need to do like a reboot. Mm-hmm. You said that you were so tired you could hardly even keep your eyes open at your desk in the afternoon. But I think sometimes in our culture, women think that that's just part of life. Like it's normal for me to feel tired in the afternoon because I'm busy and because I have all these things on my plate. So why don't you sort of like debunk some of those myths and tell us what we should really be on the lookout for if we need to do something like this?
That's such a great question. Well, okay, first of all, yes, there is truth to, many people have an energy dip in the afternoon. Like it's not entirely abnormal for that to happen, right? And there are ways to manage that. For example, making
Drinking
different
coffee.
choices. Yes. Well, yes. Although that's going to backfire, right? And by the way,
Right.
I love coffee. In fact, I'm a coffee drinker for sure. Just not generally in the afternoons. I'm a morning coffee drinker.
And I think that's like a go-to for people, right? As they hit that slump and
yeah.
they're like, oh, I just need a latte or whatever. And so then that's creating more problems because you're not getting to the heart
That's
of
right.
the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not consuming anything that's going to give you real energy. It gives you false energy, right?
Right.
And then you crash later. But I mean, there are ways to, you can make different choices at breakfast and lunch, for example, to sort of prevent the kind of deep energy dip that a lot of people have in the afternoon. And I still have that. You can also manage the way that you schedule your tasks. There's certain things that I know that I'm not going to be able to focus on in the afternoon. In fact, someone recently wrote a book. Was it, oh my gosh, what's his name? He's a New York Times journalist who I'm totally drawing a blank, but he recently wrote a book about these sort of, biological cycles that we have in terms of, and when we should do certain tasks throughout the day. I'll see if I can look it up. You can put it in the show notes, but,
Sure.
Anyway, there is truth to that dip for sure. But to answer your question, I mean, I think the things that I hear that indicate that someone is ready for, as you said, kind of a reboot or not feeling like they can achieve whatever they've set out to achieve is that they tend to be in this kind of chaotic mind state. Like, and I don't mean that in like a, like a pathological sort of way, but like they feel disorganized and anxious, and they also feel tired, and they say they feel lazy and frazzled and lacking in confidence. Like those are all of the things that I hear women say when they come to me. And it's sort of this sense of like, I want that deep calm and confidence that I used to feel. So yeah, that's, and the other thing I think people can look for is, these women are often coming to me or facing a big life transition that's motivating them to make some kind of change. So sometimes they're coming to me when they're building a business or changing careers, or contemplating these things, right? Or celebrating a big birthday. I get a lot of people at the turn of the decade, right? When they turn 30 or 40. Or 50, when they've just had kids, or they're getting a divorce, or they're becoming an empty nester. Some kind of big life transition often is what predicates the desire to make a change, or the realization that how they're currently living is not sustainable, and it's not allowing them to be who they want to be.
Mm-hmm. What I love about this work that you're talking about, and even about how you explained it, how it happened in your own life, is that this didn't come of a dissatisfaction with your body or with how you looked.
Mm-mm.
And I think I just want to point that out, because I think that so often we think of like changing our nutrition as being connected to our weight or our bodies or the shape of our bodies. And it's so much deeper than that. And yes, changing your nutrition can change the shape of your body, but it's so much more important than that. I mean, I feel like that is the least important thing when it comes to really getting clear on how we're nourishing ourselves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because yes, weight loss is, it's a really, this is going to sound weird, but it's kind of a surface level goal, right? So many of the women who come to me, like that might be on their list of things. It's not always. And as we talk, like in our initial conversation, it always goes deeper than that. It's not about the weight loss. That's sort of like a thing that they've latched onto, right? Which I get, totally. And it has almost like, food is important. Absolutely. Food is important. And we figure that out. we also look at everything else. And part of the reason that I do the work that I do in the way that I do it, meaning as a coach versus a registered dietitian, for example, which, like registered dietitians, great. Nutritionists, great. There's a very specific, need for that. And I never thought it made sense to separate how you eat from the rest of your life. And if you're not looking at things like, food, physical activity, relationships, career, stress management, if you're not looking at all of those things, just changing your food's not going to make any difference.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to make enough of a difference anyway. It might make some difference, but it's kind of the gateway in to bigger changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really like, I so resonate with this because about a year ago, in fact, I even did a podcast episode on this. I really started to understand that for me, eating was deep work, like spiritual work. And when I say work, I mean the kind of work that we do on ourselves to help us rise up, to evolve, to reach our inspired potential. And when I sort of put eating in that category, it completely changed how I thought about food and how I approached food in my life and how I thought about food interacting with my body and my spirit and my mind. And I just think that it's such an interesting conversation. And I think to that end, I want to know more. You said, if I had not made these changes, if I hadn't gotten curious and started diving in, I would never have been able to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I want to know more about that.
Yeah. Now that I know, so I just a little background. I took this leap into entrepreneurship, at least initially, when I got laid off from a job when the market crashed at the end of 2008, 2009. Which was, experience that many people had. I took it as an opportunity to, I loved my career in entertainment. I had the best time. I mean, I worked for some amazing companies, had amazing experiences. And when I got laid off, I was very clear that I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to keep doing that. And so that was my first step into it. My point in telling you that is, I've been at it in some way, shape, or form for, a long time now. But I didn't fully understand the amount of sort of energy and strong mindset that you need to go on this journey until, really a few years ago. Because I was just like flailing around. I was consulting. I was like, I was getting a Pilates instructor certification. I taught Pilates for a couple of years when I was still in New York. And then I studied health coaching. And I was sort of feeling around for how I didn't have a business really until honestly, a few years ago, I wouldn't have called it a business. And so I don't think I was conscious of it, but this is no joke. Entrepreneurship is no joke.
No.
It is not an easy path, right? I mean, you have to be so mentally and physically strong to take this path. It's just, so I think that's what I mean. And I didn't know that this was happening. I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to articulate. But, when you look at the most successful leaders, and whether they're entrepreneurs or leaders in the corporate space, they all prioritize mind-body health.
Totally. 100%. What I think is super interesting too about your story, and even about how you say clients come to you, is that there seems to be an inner pull to that.
Yeah.
And that's really getting to the heart of what I like to talk about. And that is connecting with our inner voice and really listening to what your body, to what your heart, to what your spirit is telling you. And I think that we often separate those things. Well, that's the spiritual part of me. And then food and exercise is this physical part of me. And then my work is this other part. Can you talk about how we begin first to listen and then to integrate those things?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, the window in to listening was through my physical body.
Yeah.
And that's to a large extent where I start with clients too, because I think it's more accessible. For most people, it's a more accessible place to start. For me, it happened because I was practicing Pilates, and had been practicing Pilates for many years before I became a certified instructor. But through the certification process, for anyone who practices Pilates or yoga or any discipline that requires intense focus, that is one way to begin cultivating that, I think. And even though you're starting with your physical body, I think it starts to also help you get in touch with, that inner voice. It's all the same thing, right?
Right. Yes.
So, that's how I think, again, looking back on it, that's how it happened for me. And, the way that it happens for many of my clients, again, starts with, food experiments that we run. So, I like to call them experiments because that's way more fun than, it's just a way more fun way to look at it. But I think that's finding something that, or just making the decision to start paying attention over time. It's a practice, right? It doesn't happen overnight, but starting to connect, if we're talking about food, starting to connect your mood to the food choices that you make, for example, which is not something that most people think about. Your mood, your energy level, what happens? Yeah.
I love that. So let's get into some nitty gritty, because I really want our listeners to feel like, okay, I get it now, but what do I do? So, what do you think are some first, even baby steps after we begin to make that intention to pay attention and to listen? Because really, I think that's the first step, right? So we've made the intention to listen to our bodies, to listen to the pulls, the tugs. What would be a next step to reactivating that woman of power, that rising woman inside of us?
Well, if we're talking about food specifically, the simplest exercise I can give people, and is my favorite because I love breakfast, it's called the breakfast experiment. It's very, very simple. It's exactly what it sounds like. And it's one of the first things that I have all of my clients do, which is have something different for breakfast for 5 days in a row, at least 5 days, and have sort of a mix of, carb heavy, protein heavy mix, all this kind of stuff. Write down how you feel just after you eat it. And then again, 2 hours later. And what I'm looking for is, what's your energy level, say on a scale of 1 to 5, what's your mood, and what's your hunger level on a scale of 1 to 5. And that is the very first step in terms of, again, the physical body and the way food affects you, to start understanding, how certain choices are affecting you. And I also encourage people in that list of 5 things to, have like a muffin and coffee one morning, or a bowl of breakfast cereal, which we all kind of know that's probably not going to keep us going, but try it and just see how you feel so that you have that touch point. So that's from a food perspective. That's one way to do it. I think from a sort of the mind piece of it, or the mind body piece of it, and the spiritual piece of it, that can be a bit more challenging. I think for me, it's happened through, and this is going to sound like such a cliche, but it's for a health coach, but it's happened through meditation.
It doesn't, I get it that you think that sounds cliche, but here's the thing, people, meditation really works.
Yeah. There's a reason it's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I also remind people that, meditation doesn't have to be sitting on a cushion in the middle of a yoga studio oming. It can be a very practical day-to-day thing. It can be as simple as picking something to notice throughout the day. So notice the sounds around you. Notice the smells around you. Pick some aspect of your environment to focus in on just for a day. And you're going to come in and out of it. You're not going to be able to focus on it the whole time. But it's about cultivating mindfulness in that moment. Like, doing the dishes can be a meditation. Eating absolutely can be a meditation. If you're focused on your food and how it tastes and how it feels, and slowing down to eat, which is really hard for a lot of people. And eating without distractions, right? So not reading a book, not watching TV, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, how often have you sat down to eat something while you're reading or on social media, scrolling away or whatever, and then like you look down and it's gone?
Totally.
And you're like, oh, you're like disappointed. Like
Yeah,
I didn't
and
even
you're
realize I was eating it.
I know. And you don't feel full either. And I mean, let's be honest. I'm in it with everyone. Like I'm in it with my clients because I struggle with that stuff too. And I think one of my personal, I'll call it a rule, but this is a rule that I sometimes, have to re-implement for myself if I start drifting away from that mindful eating, which is simply, if I want to eat something, I need to be sitting at the table. End of story. Like there's no eating anywhere else.
Yeah.
There's no eating on the couch. There's no eating in the car. There's no whatever. There's no eating walking down the street. I must be sitting at a table or, if I'm out in a park or whatever, sitting on a bench, whatever it is, sitting.
I think that's a great rule. And I think too, I love that first of all, that you're sharing your struggles with us too, because so often we hear people on podcasts and we think, well, they've got it all together. They have it all figured out.
Oh my goodness.
And
no.
I try to be really honest with people and be like, shit comes up and bites you in the butt.
Yes.
And that is normal and that is to be expected. And so it's good to know that you're showing us by example. Like I have these little sort of tricks that when I feel like I'm slipping a little bit, I put my firmer rules into place and then that helps me. I think that's so great.
Well, and I think it's important to understand that from my perspective, I teach a class about what I call unconscious stories, keeping you feeling tired and lazy, right? So these sort of unconscious stories that we tell ourselves about being healthy and taking care of mind, body. And, all or nothing is one of those stories. It's a very common, unconscious story that afflicts high achieving women,
So
I think
true.
to a larger degree. So I call it the all or nothing trap, and it's tied to perfectionism.
Yes, it is. I speak from experience.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, and so I think in order to succeed in these areas, it's really vital to let go of that and to also let go of, I often talk about, women creating a grand plan when they start to embark on some kind of new health journey or even any goal. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even have to be health related, but, creating these sort of audacious goals. And there's, the trick with goals I find is to set the bar high enough that they're inspiring and achievable. And I think there's a middle ground there. And that's really important with this.
Well, so
this kind of
when
work.
someone is embarking on this grand plan of reactivating the real me, what would you suggest to be some good goals to set? And realizing, of course, that they would be individual, but like generally speaking, in your work with women, like how do you guide them to make sort of these first goals?
Yeah. I think the 3 areas to think about, and this is what I see as sort of the biggest challenge areas for my clients, are food, right? Eating better. Exercising more is the second one, or moving more, I like to say, because exercise sometimes, sounds like drudgery.
Hard, yeah.
Right, exactly. And then the third piece is stress management. And I include sleep in that bucket, which is vital. In fact, if you do nothing else, get your sleep sorted, and a lot of the other stuff will fall into place. But those are kind of the 3 areas that I would start with in terms of setting goals. And they've got to be realistic goals. So for example, one of the first things I have clients do with food is just start eating a serving of dark leafy greens every day. That's it. Just do that. Do that. And if you just do that, you're going to start seeing movement. You're going to start seeing motivation.
I'll put in a tip there. Like one of my favorite ways to get my dark leafies is in a smoothie because you hardly even taste it.
Totally. Yeah. If you don't like the taste of greens, absolutely. And use, like I always say, use spinach or like Swiss chard for smoothies because they have sort of a more neutral flavor. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's, but as far as the goals, I mean, those are the 3 areas. And I would say the other area that's really important to look at is, how do I frame this? I'm going to say sort of personal development and happiness. And that includes things like what's happening in your relationships. What are your aspirations for your career? What do you want to do for yourself to, maybe it's tapping into your creativity. Maybe that's something that you feel like, what are these pieces of your, quote unquote circle of life that might need some attention right now that don't fall into the category of traditional like health and wellness stuff like food and exercise?
Yeah, they all go hand in hand. I 100% believe that. And I would say too, that here's a good place where as you begin to think about the goals that you want to set for yourself to get back to your true self, the real you, right? Here's where getting still and going inward and connecting with your inner voice will really help you, because I think there's so much information swirling around about what you should eat and how you should exercise and how much sleep you should have. Like, it's easy to sort of make those goals on an intellectual level.
Yes.
Really heady, like, well, I know what I should be doing. I need to do this, XYZ. But that's not gonna be the best way that we can set those goals. If we really come up with the goals that our heart is sharing with us, number one, they're going to mean more. Number two, they're going to be a lot more personal and a lot more, you'll see a lot more change that way. And number three, I think they will be easier to attain because you know that they're coming from the real you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the big things that I think helps with that is tuning into why you want what you want, because that's a piece that's often missing. And I ask my clients to dig really deeply into that when they're setting their initial goals to create the end game for my clients is creating what I call their vibrant health playbook, right? It's sort of their personal like roadmap to feeling like their real self, right? Mm-hmm. But understanding why you want what you want. Like, so for example, let's just say weight loss. Okay, why do you care? Like, well, how is that getting in the way of your life, your dreams, whatever? Like, let's get underneath that, right? So really asking yourself why you want what you want until there's no other answer. It's like, I always say, it's like a toddler saying, but why, mommy, why? Mm-hmm. And keep asking that until you know. And that's where that inner voice comes in, right? Like, that's where, like you said, getting quiet, getting still, tuning out all of that external stuff with like the different diets and the different exercise plans and the whatever. Like, you don't have to be like this is one of the other unconscious stories that I talk about, is what I call the identity illusion. Like what a healthy person should look like.
Oh man.
And I'm like, but how do you know? I mean, someone asked me the other day, actually, when I was teaching that class, she said, I have difficulty getting a consistent exercise schedule in every week. Is it okay if I do it every other week? And I was like, sure. Like, if that works for you and that feels good and that feels sustainable, then absolutely do what works for you. That's again, it goes back to listening to your inner voice, right? Like, that's totally where you're going to get those answers.
Yeah. And I will speak for myself in that my sort of go-to when I have a problem is I'm going to research it. Right.
Yes.
And I think a lot of high achieving perfectionist, type A women probably go to that place because why? Because we're smart and because those strategies worked when we were like in school, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a problem, you do research on it. You read a book, you go to that place of like asking for advice and then receiving it. And I think at some point in all of our lives, we have to come to this place where we have such a strong sense of trust in our own intuition that we don't need that. And maybe that even looks like taking a fast from that input. So like, put the Google down, yeah. Right? Put the social media down, take a fast, take a break from that input so you can really connect with what your intuition is saying, because oftentimes it's hard to discern the difference if you're having input all of the time.
Totally. Yes. I'm so glad you said that, because I have been working a lot around that as it relates to my business decisions, because I started to notice that, I'm in a mastermind group and I have lots of advisors that I go to for input. And I started to notice that I was becoming overly dependent on others to validate my decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You know, so I've been really practicing listening to my intuition when it comes to business stuff. And it's been kind of amazing. And gosh, it feels good when you can finally trust that. And you know, you may not 100% trust it, and that's okay. But to just start making decisions from that place and seeing results, whether it's in business, in life, in health, and whatever.
Right. And that's how the trust builds. I mean, you got to start somewhere, and maybe you have very little trust in that right now. The way to build the trust is to listen, to do the thing, and to see the result. And then you're like, oh, okay, that worked. And maybe it's just a tiny thing. Maybe it's just breakfast.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you dial that in and you're like, okay, I did it for breakfast. Now let me do it for movement. Now let me do it for, you know, a daily practice to help me connect with my inner voice. I mean, this is what I teach women with journaling too. There's no one right way. You have to, like you say, experiment and find what works for you and trust it. And then, you know, you gradually build that trust, build. And then it becomes so much easier when you are further along that trust journey.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny that you bring up journaling. That's a practice that I keep wishing that I would do, and I never do it. So maybe, I got to figure out the way. And the trick is, how to make it work for you. And that's one that I haven't cracked yet, because I feel like it's something that I would really benefit from. And yet every time I try to do it, it lasts for like 3 days.
Oh my gosh. All right. So this is awesome. I'm going to send you a link to my 5 days of journaling for visionary women. It's an email thing, and I'll put it in the show notes. So for all of you guys who are listening, you can do it with Lara, and you can have that awesome. Like support together. But it gives you lots of different ways to journal. So you know, maybe that will help and give you the idea that really works for you.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that, because awesome. I do think that that's such a powerful way to access that inner voice. You know, for me, I have used meditation for that, but I sometimes feel like it's not. I need something a little more. And my sense is that that's it.
That's my go-to. And partly it's funny because when earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that chaotic mind state. Mm-hmm. And for me, journaling helps that dissipate, right? Because if I can just journal it out and create clear space, I call it clearing space. That's the first step in my journaling, right? I've got to clear the space in order to be able to listen. And, you know, food helps with that. Exercise helps with that. Having a daily self-care practice where you're connecting intentionally with your inner voice. All of these, I consider to be critical aspects of our well-being. And that's exactly what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think, you know, unfortunately we live in a culture that doesn't always support that perspective. And I think, again, it comes back to listening to your inner voice and your own experience, because I think most women know intuitively how important that is. And so much, I think what breaks my heart is when women forget how powerful they are and how powerful their mind is. Like, to make a decision, often that's all it takes. You've just got to make a decision to prioritize whatever it is. And that's not to say you don't have things that are going to stand in your way once you've made that decision. Of course you are. Again, we live in a culture that doesn't necessarily always help with this perspective. And that mindset piece of it is the very first step, always.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this is so good. And I would just add on to, you know, another way that you can really feel supported in a culture that doesn't, you know, preach this, is to find your culture that does, right?
Yes,
so listen to In Her Voice, listen to Women on the Rise, Lara's podcast, really, immerse yourself in, with people around you that live this way. And then that becomes your culture, right? Mm-hmm. And it's easier to block out the things that don't fit in to that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great example. And I think that having that support system, it's so vital in any endeavor, really. It's whether it's business or health or anything else, having your tribe,
Totally.
is so important.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh, Laura. So I could keep talking all day, but I realize that we're coming up on time. So I want to give you an opportunity to share with my listeners how they can connect with you, listen to your podcast, and all of that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the best place to find me is at my website, which is just laradalch.com. And people can also, I have a new monthly online workshop series. And if you're interested in joining that, it's, there are topics related to, helping you get out of your own way and take action towards these goals. And that's at laradalch.com/workshops.
Great. And I'll put links to everything in the show notes. And also you'll be able to get them in whatever podcast app you're listening to. So you can click right through, go subscribe to Laura's podcast, and really start this journey of valuing your wellness and understanding that it will change everything. Laura, I have one final question for you, one that I ask all my guests, and that is, in your life currently, what do you feel your inner voice asking of you or saying to you, pulling on you to do?
Oh my goodness, that is such a powerful question. I think for me recently, because I've been working on listening to my intuition as it relates to my business, what is pulling me forward is my work and the women that I'm connecting with, and also being more proactive about reaching out to women that I sense might need my help rather than always waiting for them to come to me. That's been an interesting experiment that my inner voice has been pushing me to try, and it's way out of my comfort zone, but it's been really powerful for both me and them.
And it's funny how that's what our inner voice often pushes us towards.
Yeah,
something
totally.
way out of our comfort zone. So I just want to honor you for being courageous in your business, in your life. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And I hope that we will be talking very soon.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This was truly amazing.
Okay, here's what I love about that. Just the reminder that it does not have to be all or nothing. Reactivating, finding the things that light you up again, which starts with taking care of who you are, taking care of your body. Man, what a difference it makes when we're doing that, right? But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Start with one change, dialing your breakfast. Do that breakfast experiment. After we got off the recording, I was telling Laura, I dialed my breakfast in about a year ago, and I rotate between 3 different breakfasts depending on what I'm doing that day. If I'm working out in the morning or if I'm working on the podcast, whatever, like I have different breakfasts for different things. And that's because I have figured out what works for me, and I rarely stray from that. I have to be honest with you. And maybe that sounds boring, but you know what? I know what works, and I know what makes me feel good, and I know what allows my true self to shine through. And anything that I can do to help that, I want to do it. So you know what? It would be super cool for you guys to do that little breakfast experiment and then let us know how it goes. Shoot me a message over on Instagram, and you can connect with Lara there as well. And let us know what your go-to breakfast is. And just as a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by Beautycounter. Anytime that you buy a product, and all of these are safe for you, safe for skincare is what Beautycounter is all about. Anytime you buy one of their products, be it skincare, makeup, lotion, body wash, whatever is floating your boat, you are supporting In Her Voice. And you can check out all of the amazing goodness that Beautycounter has to offer at my link, kellycovert.com/beauty. And when you do that, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you anyway, but that appreciation runs even deeper when you say to me, yeah, Kelly, I believe in what you're doing. Thank you. And this is how I'll show you, by buying myself a treat. It's like the best of both worlds, really. So anyway, let me remind you that, gosh, did you know how amazing you are? Did you know that you were born at this exact moment in time to walk this earth in this exact moment in time, just as you are? You matter that much. That much. Let me just remind you that. I feel it. I'm sending you love today, and I'm reminding you that each and every day you are worthy.